Welcome back to our weekly Torah podcast. I'm Nathaniel, here together with Sam as we dive into this week's Parashat Ki Tetze. This parasha is one of the richest in the Torah, containing no less than 74 mitzvot, more than any other portion. It ranges from laws about family life, morality, business ethics, social justice, compassion for the vulnerable, and even the treatment of animals. What's fascinating is how these seemingly detailed laws weave together a picture of how Torah guides not just ritual life, but everyday human interactions. And today, we'll explore some of the deeper lessons behind these mitzvot and what they mean for us in the modern world. So we just finished reading the parasha, and we had a little brief discussion before starting today's podcast. It's a brutal parasha. It's a very black and white. I find it's very it addresses a lot of how we work in this world and how we think and what we do, and gives us answers to what if situations. So one of them that we'll start out talking about Eshet Yafat Toar, which is the captive woman. So Ki Tetze begins with a law about soldiers taking a captive woman during war. And on the surface, I find it very troubling. But the Torah actually restricts and humanizes what would have been a brutal common practice in the ancient world. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Sam, to kind of talk about this part and what happens to this taken prize of war.
Before we jump into that, as you said, a lot of the elements of this parasha are very controversial, especially in the Western world. And I think one of the reasons why that is, and something that might help us, and we're gonna refer back to this in the discussion over and over, is that many people think that when somebody sins or when somebody does something wrong, a lot of people think, oh, God's gonna punish you, like God is gonna specifically come down and punish that person because he did something bad. But in reality, what happens is the universe has already been pre-programmed to punish, to cause things to come, bad things to come because of these actions. And when you look at it that way, and you start to observe the real world to see what happens when you do some of these bad things, you start to see the punishments coming. So I find that to be a much better way to look at it and much more accurate. So having said that, the captive woman, Nathaniel mentioned it was a brutal practice of the ancient world. I would say it's of the not so ancient world as well, because it still happens today in certain parts of the world when when women are taken and they're just raped. And it reminds me of something that happened. I believe it was in the first Iraq War. No, it was the second Iraq War, where some of the American soldiers, after the main hostilities were over, and there was more of an occupation, some of the American soldiers started to go to a children's center someplace in Iraq, I forget where, and they would read stories to the kids, and they would do things with the children. And there was a journalist who interviewed some of the local people and asked them what they thought about this. And they're like, what do you think about the soldiers going over there and dealing with the kids? And the overwhelming response is that, yeah, they're raping the kids because they're the conquerors. And so they're raping the children. And they said it yeah, that's what happens. And so a friend of mine mentioned this to me. And I said, look, that's how life is, right? Their wars are no holds barred. They still have a a mentality of the dark ages. We saw it on October 7th, right? Where you come in, there's innocent people, doesn't matter. Because you can, now you can kill them. And they do. And they kill women and they kill children and they rape and they do whatever they want. And so the Torah here is coming and putting a limit on this, as if to say, a war is a war. And the Torah is pretty ruthless when it comes to fighting war. But raping is not part of fighting a war, okay? It's something separate. You don't need to rape people in order to win a war. So, yes, you need to do whatever you can to win a war quickly, but all of this other stuff that goes along with it, all this barbaric behavior is not tolerated. So it was a very important distinction, at such an ancient time as when this book was written. So I think that's my take on it.
Okay, well, as you see in the first aliyah here, I'll highlight when you take field against your enemies and your God delivers them into your power, and you take some of them captive. And you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her and take her into your household as your wife. You shall bring her into your household, and you shall trim her hair, pare her nails, and discard her captive's garb. She'll spend a month's time in your household, lamenting her father and mother. After that, you may come to her and thus become her husband, and she shall be your wife. Why?
Well,
Why is this?
she's no longer a captive. She's a woman.
But
And
I'm going specific here. Why trim her hair, pare her nails?
I believe, and Madame, you might be able to help us with this. I believe this is because she's in mourning.
Well, there are
I think something else, if you don't mind me jumping in. I think it's to make her less desirable.
True.
And to show that there really is true desire, even with her hair cut, her nails pared back, the garb discarded, and then she mourns for a month.
Right.
Are you still willing to take her? Sorry,
Right.
go on.
That's very interesting.
Well, according to Rabbi Akiva, he says it is not to pare her nails nor her head, it is to let it grow. Another rabbi gives the opposite. But like Nathaniel said, I believe it was to, first of all, to quash that desire, that lust, maybe, and to respect her as a human being.
Right.
Not to be given as an object, as a sexual object or an object of conquest.
Right. Which goes back to, yes, she was a captive of war, but now she's your wife, or you want to make her your wife. Now she's a human being. You treat her like any human being. You wouldn't take your neighbor's daughter and just rape her, right? So you're not going to do this with her either. The fact that she was a captive has nothing to do with anything.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's the law still stands. And so that's the interesting part, is that power is not respected in the Torah the way it's respected by other people. Yes, you have power over her. Yes, you conquered, you overcame. So what? Okay, you did it. It's over. Now we continue. And another very good point here. Once the war is over, the important thing is not how you fight the war, it's what you do after the war is over. Right?
Correct.
Do you build back a civilization? Do you
Correct.
impose laws? That is what makes that is what people should take pride in. We shouldn't take pride in fighting a war with white gloves, right? That's nonsense as far as I'm concerned. You need to fight a war to finish it, and once you finish, you put your pride and your energy into rebuilding a culture, a community,
Yeah.
laws, advancement, etc.
I find it fascinating how brutal the ruling can be when we're at war, right? Wipe out this, wipe out. And yet the Torah is also so compassionate, where you see in this next line about the firstborn. If there's an unloved firstborn who's born before the more loved firstborn, of another wife, of a second wife or third wife, that the inheritance is doubled for the unloved one.
Mhm.
And it shows if that one's going to be set aside, ignored, not loved, not coddled or whatever, like a normal firstborn would be in at that in that time, in our time, then he's due material things that hopefully make up for what he's missing emotionally. But I love the balance in here.
Yeah, I
The
think that
Talmud,
the firstborn always gets double. Is that not the case?
it is correct, but in here it is the rabbis, the Talmud attaches the situation of the boy to the captive. It could be that he would be born from that captive woman.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore they are not different subjects. They deduct one from the other.
Mm.
Maybe he falls in love with that captive and therefore endears her son more. And so the Torah intervenes. No, he cannot do that.
Well,
Right.
let's say the son, whichever son it is, this
Correct.
next section is brutal.
Yeah,
If
and
it's a wayward son, what happens to this wayward son? They try to discipline him. He doesn't change. He doesn't improve. The father and mother have to take hold of him, bring him out to the elders of the town in a public place in their community, and they shall say to the elders of this town, this son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He does not heed us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. What happens to the son? He's
Well,
stoned to death.
yes, and
the
so
Mishnah, I'm sorry,
no, go ahead, go ahead.
the Mishnah speaks about it, but the Talmud said, first of all, it never happened. It is only hypothetical, and it was also addressing the fact that this was the norm, that the parents had a total control over a child. To them, it was their possession. The Torah says, no, it is not so. And again, the rabbis again put this in the context of the child being born from the captive woman, perhaps, and there is a legitimate woman. Therefore, there is a dysfunctional family.
Right.
And for the first time, the Torah is going now to give equal right to the mother. She is speaking with the father. They both take a hold. The fact that in Hebrew the word is to grab means that there is dysfunction in the family, that there is maybe abuse of the child.
Right.
And also
the role of the council.
Hold on, James.
There is also a very short window, which is just after his bar mitzvah and just a few months before he's really a man, considered a man in Torah. So it was such a small window that it made it practically impossible to condemn him to death. The Talmud says it never happened in
Interesting.
the Torah.
James?
The role of the council is to protect the child, not
Correct.
to condemn him.
Correct. It was an intervention.
Right, but now
Whereas in ancient Rome, they didn't have these laws, and parents would just kill their children for being disobedient.
right. So let's I think go back to what I mentioned at the beginning. Let's start looking at the real world and see what happens when some of these laws are violated, as the Torah suggests. So first of all, when there is favoritism among children, when the parents favor one son over another, what happens in the real world? The other children have resentment. Right? We have many examples of this. The story of Yosef is one of them, right? Where he's loved and his brothers resented him, and they got all the way to they got to the point of selling him as a slave. Now, of course, Hashem was behind all this, but you can see how the violation of these laws start to sort of produce poison in
Even
human
his father,
relationships,
his
right?
father Jacob and Esav.
Right. That as well. And now let's look at the wayward son. What happens if you have a wayward son and you do nothing? Right? We're seeing that today in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
You have a lot of these kids that go and shoot up their schools, and they go so far off the rails
Mm-hmm.
that so something needs to be done. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't just let, children do whatever they want with zero discipline. So something needs to be done. And
Mm-hmm.
a law like this, I think, has the effect more of inspiring fear among the children. They know
Correct.
that something can happen like this. And
Right.
then it's like, oh, okay, well, wait a second. Because kids, what they're really doing is they're testing boundaries. They're
Hmm.
not seriously like rebelling
Mm-hmm.
unless things get to the point where it's really bad. So at the very beginning, if kids already know this, they know that they can test boundaries, but they need to be careful. There's a limit to that. So they can test a little bit, but then they'll probably back off. So I think that all needs to be considered here as well.
Stefan,
Correct.
did you want to chime in here?
No, I was just gonna say to Deanna's point, the Talmud says if there was a death once every 20 years, it was a bloody Sanhedrin. So it just goes to show how much the rabbis were trying to make things not so aggressive as, Torah Peshat level says.
That is correct. The Mishnah makes it practically impossible. If the father, for instance, had lacking fingers or a hand, he could not bring the child. If the mother was deaf, they could not bring the child. They made it practically impossible to put this child to death. There was intervention, for instance, in Morocco, when a child was a little bit hard to discipline, he would be sent, the grandparents will intervene. There was always an uncle, there was always an unmarried aunt who took that child. He was never left to fend for himself. The
Hmm.
society was around him.
Right, but I think, that there's an interesting reason, I think, behind that. Why is it that the Rabbanim and the Jewish people in general sort of pulled towards the compassionate side? Why didn't they just stay objective in the middle? And I think it's because the rest of the world was so barbaric
Mm-hmm.
that the rest of the world would see laws like this and they'd be like, yeah, sure, let's do it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the point either. The point is you have to have, we have to push for life. If there's something that we have to have a preference for, it's for life, it's for compassion. And so we should prefer that, but we should recognize at the same time that there are limits and that when we don't intervene when we should,
Mm-hmm.
it's poison that seeps into the society. We see that here in the US, for example, here in 10 miles from my house, there was a murder of 19 children in a high
Oh,
school a few
God.
years ago. Okay. Now, I don't know what's happened to the assassin, but we haven't heard anything since.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This was like, I don't know, probably close to 10 years ago. And it's like when you do things like this, you have 19 grieving families. There's no closure, there's no justice that was ever announced. And so what happens now? He goes to prison for the rest of his life. So we have to pay for 3 meals a day for the rest of his life because
Mm-hmm.
he killed 19. What is this? And so this causes a lot of poison, and it's hard to gauge the damage that this causes. But who knows if one of the members of those 19 families psychologically collapses, becomes a murderer, goes into drugs, abuses his siblings or his parents or whatever. None of these things are ever tracked, right? But these are real things that happen. So I think we need to take stock of that at this point in time that we've gone too far to the other side.
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, let's move on to the next point here on third aliyah about kindness and responsibility towards others. I find it fascinating the returning lost objects and helping a neighbor's fallen donkey, sending away a mother's bird before taking the eggs.
Mm-hmm.
Not fascinating. I love, this is what makes me love so much the Torah and what we stand for is the kindness and compassion for not just people, but animals as well and nature and small acts of kindness that end up shaping our character.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But again, if you look at the practical aspect of it, why should you kill a mother and the eggs? Right? If you destroy 2 generations of anything,
True.
you've cut off the survival of
But
those.
you don't think of that when, especially I'm assuming in these days, finding a bird that's easy to catch, easy to eat. And, I'm not saying they were starving, but there were, food was probably, and hunting was a big part of their life. So imagine the restraint we had to put. Hey, you know what? I'll find another bird. I mean, there are many other birds in the tree, right? That could be the thing. But here I have breakfast with an egg and I have lunch with a chicken or bird, right? Some fowl. But it teaches it just what you said, Sam. Let it go for another generation. First of all, you shoo the mom away. That's one of the laws that we have here is you have to shoo the mother away. She can't see the pain of her eggs being taken away. It's better that she comes back and maybe she's thinking, wait, wrong nest? What happened to it? Something like that rather than a hand came and took them. So, but the same thing with you can't have an ox and a donkey tied to the same yoke.
The same yoke.
Yeah,
plow. Why?
There's an interesting explanation for that, which is, I don't know if it's true or not, but the ox chews the cud, right? The donkey does not. And so one of the explanations I heard is that when you feed them, they both eat, and then, there's a big difference, right? After they're done eating, the ox or the cow will sit down and bring up its cud and start chewing it again. And maybe the donkey thinks, hey, where did he get that food? They didn't give me any more food, right? And then that causes.
That sounds like a Mishnah story.
Right. Like a midrash or something like that.
But
I don't know if it's true, but it's interesting, right?
I think the obvious here, especially if you've done any farming or been with animals, you've got an ox, which is much stronger than a donkey. And for him to pull and plow would be 10 times easier than the donkey. So what it's doing is it's starting to now drag the donkey along and wear him down. So again, fair and balanced.
Another beautiful aspect, you do not muzzle the animal.
Oh yeah,
that is amazing that they take into consideration the thirst and the hunger of an animal.
Right. And this is one of many laws in this parasha that to me falls under one principle, which is this whole economics and money thing. Don't take it so seriously, right? Don't go crazy with it. Don't follow it to the nth degree. We've seen anybody who's been to business school as I was, they talk a lot in business school about maximizing your profits, right? So if you have a vineyard, you should collect every single grape in that vineyard because you're maximizing your profits. The Torah is against this. And it makes sense because the reality is Hashem gave us life. He gave us everything. He gave us the land and the vineyard and the plants and everything. And so we need to recognize that and say, you know what? We were given everything. So let's collect, but don't be so crazy about it, so OCD, obsessive about it, that you're going to go and pick up every single. No, just pick it up, do one pass, and then just leave it. Whatever fell for a reason. Leave it there. Leave it for the homeless, for the widow, for the and then the same thing with the animals. Don't be so crazy about your profit that you're not going to let your ox eat a couple of ears of corn, when he's the one doing all the work. So, and again, if you go to the real world, what happens when you do go crazy with economics? Well, then there's a reaction from the poor people, right? There is a claim against the rich with Hashem. Hashem listens to it. And then, not surprisingly, we have things like communism that come in, and there's a huge backlash towards the rich. There's violence, there's destruction, there's everything, because we went too far with the whole capitalism idea. So I see it over and over in the parasha. Very interesting.
Well, let's move on to the fourth aliyah here. The reason I want to move on to it is because it's about business and dealing with business, justice in business and society. And it mentions in this fourth aliyah, you have to have honest weights and measures, not unequal weights in your pockets. You have to pay for workers on time before sunsets daily. Can't take advantage of the poor stranger. And I want to reflect in an era of corporate scandals and economic potential inequality, these mitzvot are especially relevant. And we happen to have a super business attorney in our midst, Frank, who practices law and business law and specifically financial law. So I'd love to hear your input on this, Frank, in this fourth aliyah.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say I don't know, because the Torah is very clear. I cannot see any kind of loophole here. You shall not deduct interest from loans to your fellow Israelites, albeit to foreigners. So let's stick to the Israelites. The reality today is that we are charging and deducting interest, whether Israelites or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the greatest bankers in history are all Jews. I mean, and today we have the Goldman Sachs, the Lehman Brothers, the Rothschilds, you name it. So the question I have really, and it would be interesting to hear everybody's input here, is how do we reconcile such very clear wording? I mean, this is an exact textbook for a draftsman. It's very clearly drafted. I don't see how you can twist the language, yet we are doing exactly today the opposite of what the Torah is telling us. So maybe you can advise me and tell me how we can reconcile those.
Well,
now I know that just give me 1 second, Diana. And
Yeah,
so I know that the rabbis and the Talmud came up with some mechanisms where you're not really paying interest, but you're, let's say, participating to the growth. But that's not interest, that's equity. It's a different world. It has nothing to do with interest. So they put indemnities and things like that to say, well, if you don't pay the interest, then you're going to have to pay some whole bunch of indemnity. But the reality is that, one, very few people apply that. And two, it just doesn't work. I have seen actual cases where people came to me and said, can we use this Jewish mechanism in Europe in civil system? It just doesn't work. You have to play it around. So I still struggle to reconcile what the Torah says and what happens today in our modern banking system, where you have Jews, we are basically running it. And if anybody can help me understand it better, I'm welcoming the comments and the advice.
well,
So,
I'm sorry.
so in terms of the modern banking system, it goes back to medieval Europe. Christians were not allowed to charge interest to other Christians, Muslims were not allowed to charge interest to other Muslims, and Jews were not allowed to charge interest to other Jews. So what happened was, whenever a Christian ruler or a Muslim ruler would go to wage a war, they would borrow from a Jewish family because the Jewish family was allowed to charge interest to both groups. But eventually, I don't really know how that got distorted into becoming the modern day when Jews do charge interest to other Jews. I do know that eventually we got, like, you know, this was part of the reason for the Alhambra decree, was that the Spanish royal family owed money to Jews, and rather than pay them, uh, decided to kick them out. Um, and then the Pope came up with a loophole so that Venetian bankers could charge interest to people regardless of their religion. Uh,
Well, that's a very interesting historical
I
part.
mean,
I'd like to hear what Deanna was going to say here.
This law applies for really, it was an agrarian society to begin with. And it was meant for people who needed to were in dire need to buy seeds, to buy food. So therefore, no interest could be applied. Even to today, we had the Gomle Hasidim Tovim, where you cannot, until today, we had this Jewish organization where that lends money without interest. When the banking world started, then the rules changed. This applies to a time where you are really helping somebody in dire need. You cannot take advantage of his poverty. It still applies today when it is needed. When it comes now to commercial loans, there is a different rule, and it was the Talmud addressed it, and there was such a thing as prosbul, where it was a commercial loan, it fell under a different legislation. You can charge interest at this moment when it is for speculation. But for instance, the Talmud says you cannot borrow from somebody to invest it to make more money. This is not allowed.
that's interesting. And one thing we should bring into here, I think, is the modern uh, situation with credit cards, at least in the US. If you look at credit cards and the way they work, right, they charge exorbitant interest and they tempt people to spend money they don't have and then charge exorbitant interest on it. So one of the things that's doing in the real world is it's promoting poverty. It's spreading poverty because people who don't have the discipline or the knowledge or the foresight to plan their finances, they fall into this trap. And then they sit there and all they do is make minimum payments on their credit cards their entire life. So I think part of what the Torah is saying is that there's another law somewhere else that says, don't put a stumbling block before the blind, which means that if you know somebody has a defect, right, whether it's vision or hearing, or I would say even intellect, don't abuse them because they have some sort of a deficiency, right? And this is what's happening. And interest is used in this abuse. And so instead of trying to help pull people out of poverty, they're using interest to push them into poverty. And so there's a lot of evil intent present in today's economics, which I believe is not tolerated in the Torah. In the Torah, economics is not such a serious game. The people are much more important than the economics. So you see, when you have a poor person and you took his pledge because he loaned him money, and legally you're 100% in the clear, it is your right to take a pledge, whatever. Yet, if he's poor, the respect for the human comes first. If he gave you his only piece of clothing to pledge, give it back to him. Let him sleep in it. Otherwise, he has nothing to sleep in, right? So the dignity of another human being comes first before this rugged, like economic type of thinking. And I think that's the lesson to be taken here.
Plus, we have the law of Shemitah and the Jubilee. It enabled a fresh start.
Exactly.
The
So it's
person
a
was not
game.
tethered to death forever.
Imagine what the world would be like if economics was just kind of not lighthearted, but it was much lighter sort of game that instead of this life or death struggle, which causes all kinds of problems. If you think about it in history, all kinds of violence, because everybody thinks it's a life or death game when it's not. It's just money.
Yeah. Well, to answer your question, Frank, I think we have. And I love the answer here because if you look directly at verbatim this portion of the Aliyah, you shall not deduct interest from loans to your what? Fellow Israelites, whether in money or not, and not a business, not a commercial venture. It's to your fellow Israelites. And I think that's probably the quote unquote loophole that we use in capital markets, that hey, it's a bank. It's set up as a business. And how else would it survive if it didn't charge interest?
So,
Right.
in other words, and I think it's my conclusion anyway, generally to the Torah, it begs to be interpreted, and not just interpreted generally, but interpreted to be able to have useful for us in our generation. And each generation will have a different reading because circumstances will be different. So it is not static, it's actually dynamic. And what you are saying to me is that exactly that. It begs to be interpreted.
Right, but the
It
spirit
is
doesn't
correct.
change. The spirit of it doesn't change, right? The fact that we should respect people before money, the fact that we shouldn't be 100%, ragged and OCD about money, that doesn't change. The technical details of it might change from generation to generation, but this is something that I have to say, one of the things I like about the Muslim world, this is something that they do beautifully. When they have an economic problem or whatever, and there's some kind of a loss, they'll say, I think, what's the word, alhamdulillah, where they say, hey, it is God's decree. I will let the money go because Hashem will give it back to me
True.
somehow. That
And
aspect of it is missing in the Western world, I believe.
another thing about interest to the foreigner was not a strain to follow the Shemitah also. That is why you could play. He did not fall into that category of the Hebrew who had to do the remission of debts. Since he did not do that, he did not benefit from the Shemitah also. And there you could charge him interest because it was a commercial venture already in the biblical times.
That's excellent points. I love this, and it's a good place for us to wrap up. Where over time now, there's so much more to talk about this, but this Parashat Ki Tetze gives us 74 mitzvot, but more than a list of rules, it's a vision of society built on justice, compassion, and integrity. From family life to business, from compassion for animals to responsibility in war, the Torah challenges us to live with holiness in every corner of life. So, on that, I thank you for joining us this week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast, and we'll see you next week for Parashat Ki Tetze. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua tov.
What of?